Should you weight cut for a meet? A question I get asked by a lot of aspiring strength athletes is, should I do a weight cut going into a meet? Now, the first thing that we need to assess here is, what is your level of competitiveness? Right? If you are a beginning weightlifter, if this is your first meet in weightlifting or powerlifting or strongman or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you really just need to develop experience. You really just need to develop time on the competition stage, understanding what those stressors are, just getting proficient at your lifts and understanding the difference between competing and training. So that's really going to be your focus. A weight cut is not something you should be focused on, and even I would argue into the intermediate stages, really not something that most people should be worried about. I do work with a lot of world-class competitors, people who are trying to break world records, who are trying to win world championships, and in that case, then a weight cut becomes something of a necessity. We are going to want to maximize our strength and size within the weight class available. Now, again, within considerations here, we have a big range, right? We could be talking about a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athlete who, for IBJJF, has to weigh in on the mat as they walk on, which is going to be a very different format than someone like my strongman competitors who might have 24 to 36 hours between weigh-ins and when they can and when they start to compete. There's also changes within, like, let's say it's MMA. Let's say we're talking to someone who's in the UFC, in which case IVs are not allowed. That's going to be a very different experience in weight cuts than with a strongman competitor where IVs are allowed. Because if I'm allowed to use the IVs to rehydrate, that's going to allow me to pull a lot more water out, be a lot more liberal with my cuts versus an MMA athlete who I have to think about, there's a potential for head trauma. We don't want to get too dehydrated if we know that we can't rehydrate as sufficiently. So those are some basic considerations. Really could do an entire video just on that, but I think what we want to kind of go into here is defining what a weight cut entails, and then what that looks like leading into it. So if we've already established that, yes, I'm on a competitive stage, yes, I would like to cut weight for this competition to fit into a weight class and maximize my weight at that weight class, what does that look like? Well, first, when we talk about a weight cut, what are we talking about? We're not just talking about a normal cut where we are spending 12 weeks in the dieting phase getting down to a lower body weight. What we're talking about here specifically is what we call a water cut. A water cut is where we manipulate water in order to draw water out of the body through fat tissue, muscle tissue, and dehydrate the body to a level to where we can really sink body weight below what it is naturally. Then when we rehydrate, we refeed, and we see body weight return to pretty close to where it was before we began the cut. And when I'm talking about this water cut, the entire process is less than a week. The actual cut itself is between 24 to 36 hours. So we're talking a pretty massive weight loss. So how much weight loss are we talking? Well, for me, I like to get the athlete within 8 to 10% of where they want to be. So if it's a 200-pound athlete, we could take them down about 20 pounds. A lot of my strongman athletes that compete at 175, we'll have them sitting around 200 pounds, the week before, pull down to 175 and have them back up around 200 pounds, usually within 8 hours after weigh-ins. Usually you can get, that first 10 pounds is pretty quick. But anything over 10%, it starts to become a real slog. It's real tough. And again, this also depends on body fat percentage, etc. But a 10% is a pretty good rule if you're talking about athletes in that range, right? Like, now when we start to get to the big boys, if we start talking about, anyone who's in that, 231 class, then, all the 231s, we can, usually pull them from like 250, 255 down to 231 pretty easily. So it rings pretty true in that 10% range. Now, again, this is mainly with strength athletes that have 24-hour plus weigh-ins. So we know that we can utilize IVs as a strategy to rehydrate quickly. So when we talk about a water cut, when we say water manipulation, what do we really mean? It's not just cutting out water a couple days before. A big part of this strategy actually is what we call a water load. So thinking in the fact that we've done maybe a small dieting phase in prep to get someone to within that 10% striking range, and then we increase calories as much as possible while maintaining that weight, because we want to have as much energy as possible going into the system that, to keep that high flux movement going, but also to make sure that training is progressing, because we're going to be peaking about a week out, and then obviously deloading into the competition and allowing for that super compensation and hopefully really hitting the mark when they go out and to compete. Now, what we're going to do in the week prior to that, which coincides usually with the deload, maybe a light workout in there, is we're going to begin water loading. And that is really just trying to saturate the cells with as much water as possible, basically water logging the cells. So what we're doing in that is we're just over consuming water, adding salt to everything so that the body really wants to hold on to as much water as possible. Now, in that process, we'll see a lot of peeing. I also like to use a natural diuretic in there, something like dandelion root. I don't really go with medical diuretics. It's too much of a variable, and it's potential kidney damage, and I don't really think that's worth it. But something like dandelion root for that 7 days or so doesn't seem to be a problem. Now, what the dandelion root does as a diuretic, it causes you to piss a lot. So we're talking these athletes are drinking 2 to 3 gallons of water a day, peeing all the time, especially kind of as we get towards those end phases, they're going to pee at night. Now, why are we using a diuretic while we're loading the water? Because we want the body to basically be tricked into compensating by holding as much water as possible. Now, what we're going to start doing is we're going to start pulling back on starchy carbs, right? Anything that holds excess water. We want to kind of flush the system out as much. We don't want a lot of fiber towards the end of this water load. We don't want a lot of, again, like starchy carbs. Anything that's going to hold on to water, we want to try to start to remove that from the digestive system. So what we do is we start to remove starchy carbs, kind of keeping things to protein and vegetables, later going just to protein and fats towards the end of the week. And then, for a lot of people, it'll be removing food altogether to try and really clear the digestive system out. I've had a lot of clients that really like to use some kind of laxative to clean their systems out. Again, not a personal favorite of mine, because that just doesn't sound like a pleasant time, but sometimes their personal choice is to do that. And again, I don't argue with anyone's own personal opinions. I'm like, hey, if this is what you're going to do, this is what you're going to do. Here's the reasons why I wouldn't. Here's the reasons why you can. Cool. So as we kind of progress in loading that water up, then we start to step it down, right? And we start, instead of stepping it down slowly, we take that water load to the very high point, and then we just cut water off. So what happens then is the body's going to compensate by holding on. We're using that diuretic, and it starts to flush the water out. As it flushes the water out, we notice, because again, the body thinks that there's all this water coming in, so it's just continuing to flush the water out. And as it flushes it out, we see weight drastically reduce. And again, we're talking 20% now, or 10%. So, again, 200-pound athlete, 20 pounds in, 24 hours is not a big deal. So we also are going to encourage some other things. We might use saunas, hot baths, Epsom salts, etc., to draw more water out through sweat. Anyone who's wrestled in high school obviously remembers putting on the trash can suit and going in the sauna, or just running around chewing on Jolly Ranchers and spitting out, so literally you're not even swallowing your own spit, trying to pee to lose those last few ounces. Not a super pleasant time. But what we're going to do here is we're going to flush out all that water. We're going to get down to a super low body weight, hopefully within the weight class we're shooting for. And then immediately after, the first thing is to get some electrolytes in. I usually go with a liter of Pedialyte and then a light meal, typically something, just some carbs and light protein, very easy to digest, because again, having probably eaten in 24 to 36 hours, something easy to digest. Then we hit the IV. After the IV, we go out for a pretty big meal and then eat regularly after that. Consuming a lot of water, maybe another Pedialyte throughout the day to sip on, just to kind of make sure, again, we're getting back those electrolytes. The IV hopefully should restore a lot of that function. And then on meet day, or if it's a multi-day meet, such as a strongman event, then we might spread out some more hydration, plan our meals accordingly, really to add starchy carbs in there to really drive that weight back up. And hopefully, by the time they're competing, they're at the same weight they were before we started the cut. So in MMA or jiu-jitsu, where we don't have that luxury of the rehydration, then we really want to try to get within 5 pounds or so of where we're at the week prior, right? We want to do an actual cut. We want to make sure we're cutting body fat and not just cutting water. Again, in MMA, we're probably going to see some water cuts depending on the federation you're with, depends on the rules. They might have hydration tests, etc. But for BJJ, especially IBJJF, where you're weighing in as you step on the mats, it's really best to just come in within striking distance, probably, maybe you don't eat that morning, and then you can have a little bit of snacks throughout the day to kind of keep your weight stable. But trying to play this water load game and being super dehydrated, it's just really dangerous because joint manipulations, potential for torn tendons, ligaments, muscles is way higher if you're dehydrated, and your performance is probably going to suffer as well. So not super recommended there. A lot of people are going to do it. Fine. I've seen a lot of high-level competitors who win lots of world championships do it successfully. Not something I would recommend. Definitely not for a local tournament. But if you are a world-class competitor and you want to, really push the envelope, that's something you could try. Again, it's another variable that you have to add in there. I don't know that energy levels are going to be great, and after a lot of matches, it's going to be pretty tough if you're dehydrated. But, if you're going to go in, I think if you can get within 5 pounds or so is a good striking distance to be in if you're going to be in those MMA tournaments. So again, the main question being, should you water cut? Totally dependent on goals, totally dependent on where you think you'll be. But in the long run, I would say that for most people, a water cut's not going to be necessary. If you are competing for a world title, if you are competing for a world record, or even a state record, national record, whatever it might be, then it might be warranted in that case, in which case, you really want to kind of work on that strategy with the client, get somebody into that, 10% shooting range, and then be able to use the water load, water cut the week prior to really get them into that range. All right, hopefully that helps. If you have any questions, make sure you sign up for our email list, and we've always got more coming.